Welcome. This is the public meeting for digital neighborhoods and digital literacy that's being co-hosted by Waterfront Toronto and the Toronto Public Library, and we're super happy that you were able to join us tonight. My name is Nicole Swern, and I'm here as part of a facilitation team that was retained by Waterfront Toronto to help support the meeting. And what I'm going to do is just quickly orient you to our plan for the night, and then we'll move straight into the meeting. First of all, I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. As I'm talking, you'll see some words up on the screen. There is a marvelous team supporting the meeting tonight. So Debbie is doing, at the back, is doing some live transcription. We've also got Aaron on AV, as well as Tarla Chan and Daryl and Noman. So you'll see that there are recordings happening, and if you're not interested in being filmed, there are stickers at the sign-in table that you can put on in order to give the folks behind the camera a signal that you're not keen on being recorded. So, what are we here to do tonight? We're here to share and discuss digital technology and how they influence today and will continue to influence how cities work. This is something that both Waterfront Toronto and the Toronto Public Library are thinking about quite a bit. And there's a couple other organizations that have joined us tonight to talk it over as well. Tech Reset Canada and the Digital Justice Lab are also here to share their thoughts. We have quite a dynamic team and knowledgeable team to sort of walk through some of these tough and very interesting and exciting discussions that the city is going to be having. And so what I thought I would do is just walk you through the package of materials that you would have picked up on the way in that give you a bit of an orientation to the material, to the evening. So the first thing when you open up your discussion guide is a meeting agenda. So if you just pull that out. We're going to have after we do some introductions and the agenda review here, there's 4 folks that are going to be talking and sharing a few thoughts. Michael Geist is joining us. He's the chair of Waterfront Toronto's Digital Strategy Advisory Panel. He's also a law professor at the University of Ottawa and the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce. So he has been a very steady hand on the ship at Waterfront Toronto as they think about digital strategy related to waterfront revitalization. We're also going to have Christina Werner with Waterfront Toronto and 2 people from the Public Library to provide their lens, Pam Ryan and Alex Carruthers. So we're going to give you a bit of a briefing between now and probably just after 7 since we started a few minutes late. We're then going to talk to you about what your experience has been with digital. And then we're going to move into what is a bit of a series of discussion stations, which are set up around the room, where we'll have about an hour to talk more intimately and get questions answered by experts in each of the topic areas that are listed there on your agenda: digital literacy, digital principles, digital neighborhoods, and digital justice and digital equity. Before we go, we're going to make sure we regroup so that people have a chance to share ideas based on, or questions or comments based on how the discussions at the stations went. So we'll regroup here so we wrap up the meeting for at least the last half hour with a large room discussion. And we're here until 9 o'clock. Some of the other materials that the team has worked hard to put together are also available online. There's a discussion guide that sort of lays out some of the topics and issues We know that digital technologies will continue to have a significant role in our lives, and we need to talk about it. We need to talk about what we're enjoying from digital tech and what's very useful for our lives. And we also need to talk about some of the concerns that some of this technology raises and really think it over. So what you've got is an attempt to lay out what those key topics are and start thinking them through with some very real-world applications. So that's the first one. You also have a handout regarding some digital principles that Waterfront Toronto has been working on, some work that this Toronto Public Library has been working on in terms of digital literacy, and a handout related to digital neighborhoods. You will see also some feedback forms that kind of come out as the night unfolds. We are asking people if they have comments, but they don't feel like you have time to get them in tonight, to submit anything else you want to talk about or comments you have between now and Wednesday, June the 5th, and that's just on the back of your agenda, so it should be pretty easy to find out where to do that. Hopefully that orients you more or less for the evening. I won't get everybody to introduce themselves, but I want to get a flavor for who's in the room. So how many of you live on the waterfront? Maybe hands straight up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not very many, maybe 6 or 7, not more than 10. Toronto Island counts as the waterfront. How many people active library users? Oh, nice, way more. How many people been to a previous event by Waterfront Toronto or the Public Library? Okay, if you're new, welcome. Thanks for coming. How many people either own a smartphone or know somebody that owns a smartphone? Oh my goodness, some people didn't put their hand up. That's supposed to be the great unifier. Obviously, one of the reasons that public meetings like this are so important is that one of the great burdens of public service is finding common ground among different points of view. And one of the ways that we do public consultation in Toronto is we are very thoughtful about where people with different points of view are coming from, and we understand consequences of different points of view, and we try to educate ourselves and learn from each other in order to help make decisions that better shape our city. And so this is one of those important touch points for both Waterfront Toronto and the library, and I will leave it to them to kick off the rest of it. What I'm going to do is hand it over to Michael Geist now, and he will hand it straight off to Christina, who will hand it straight off to Pam at the library, and we'll go through this for about the next 20, 25 minutes. If you don't mind hanging on to any questions, the rest of the evening is dedicated to answering them and having a group discussion. So if we let them get through their presentations, that would be great. All right, Michael, over to you.
Great, well, thanks very much. And on behalf of the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel, I wanted to welcome everyone here today. There are a number of members of that panel who are in the audience, and I think it speaks to the enormous amount of interest and excitement, I think, that exists on the panel for these kinds of events. We've had a number of civic labs, and now we have this kind of event, and the opportunity to engage with people, to gain those different perspectives that we can then bring back into our own discussion, I think is a terrifically important part of what we're trying to do. Now, I was asked to spend just a couple of minutes revisiting a presentation that I gave at one of those civic labs, and it was our last one that focused on the question of realizing value in this area. So it was one that took place in March, and there was a lot of focus, indeed there has been a lot of focus around the kinds of issues that we're going to be talking about today, around how you extract value out of smart cities, out of these technologies, out of the kinds of issues that we're going to talk a bit about. And as part of that, I was asked, if you take a look, this was the agenda that we had, I show up there around number 7, I was asked to give a talk on best practices around the world, which was supposed to be an easy task, right? I'm a law professor, as you heard, and so go out, get a couple of your students to assist you, take a look at what other people are doing around the world, and come back with a report on what some of those best practices are. It turned out that this was a really challenging exercise to engage in. not because there aren't examples all around the world of different kinds of activities. We could look to, for example, city development, as you see here. In India, you see activities taking place in Japan, in Brazil, all around the world. But what was striking was not so much this notion that there are best practices that we might want to latch onto, but rather it became readily apparent that many of these different places were engaging in these activities for significantly different purposes. Sometimes it was for the economic growth that might emerge when you brought some of the local businesses and others to the fore. Sometimes it was trying to find new ways to provide for affordable housing. Sometimes it was all about just innovation and this notion of better quality of life. So we saw lots of different kinds of examples, but we didn't necessarily see a core thread or a best practice. We could see this in a sense at a micro level, if that was the macro level. We see at a micro level, let's say on the issue of transit data, which often gets raised in this area. And one of my colleagues and another member of the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel, Professor Teresa Scazza, has written an article specifically about this question around transit data, where you can readily recognize that there are lots and lots of different stakeholders who are concerned with transit data, and their interests vary. Right? So as a passenger, I took the subway down to come to this event. I'm concerned about where I need to get on, where I need to get off. Are the trains running on time and the like? The community may be interested in terms of alleviating traffic congestion, in terms of the costs associated with this. We may have environmental concerns, as it's far better to get people, of course, on subways and buses than it would be on all the cars. There are businesses that have real considerations as we build out some of these sorts of things and might find new opportunities to grow and benefit from transit that takes place. So a pretty wide range of stakeholders out there. But when you take a look at the kind of rationale that cities often have about what they're seeking to achieve around that data, you find there are a myriad of different goals. Right? So on the one hand, you have some that say, we want to collect this data and we simply want to extract the benefits from it from a monetary perspective. We want to sell it. We think there is value there. And so if we can get high-end transit-based data that can generate revenue for the city, and we can use that revenue for other purposes. In other instances, they say, we want to use this data to find other parties to engage in this so that we don't have to as a city. Essentially a cost savings device by outsourcing some of these activities to others. Sometimes we want to use the leverage that we have for this data for other purposes. So for example, in San Francisco, they found that there were businesses that wanted to try to take some of this data and then try to patent around some of the kinds of activities that they were engaged in. And the city said, we can use our control over this data to stop some of those companies from trying to engage in that kind of anti-innovation type of activity. So you see a whole range of different possibilities that emerge in the context of transit data. Now, when we think about some of the discussion that's taken place here in Canada, I think you see some of the same kinds of themes emerge. When we talk about smart cities or smart digital neighborhoods and the like, sometimes we talk about it in the context of how can we best benefit the Canadian economy? How can we ensure that it's Canadian businesses that benefit from some of these activities? Sometimes it's simply about the economic growth potential and the development that takes place. Sometimes we don't talk about that at all. We talk about, well, what's the public benefit from some of these kinds of activities? Alternatively, say if we were a world-leading smart city, so to speak, or a world leader in this area, we might help develop some of the global standards that might then get adopted elsewhere and provide economic benefits that way. And sometimes it's seen merely as a really good branding opportunity for people to perceive our community in a different way. So we often see that those different kinds of perspectives come to the fore. Now, when I thought about that and thought about what we see taking place around the world with this goal of saying, well, what are the best practices? I think the realization that I came to, that I hope helps inform some of our thinking and discussion today, is that the question of how we extract value from these communities is quite simply put the wrong question. It isn't about how do we extract value from these sorts of communities and these technologies. It's really, what do we value? And as we see so many different communities come at these issues in different ways, I think part of the reason for that is that they come to that conclusion, or they answer that question in different ways. They value different things. At the heart of the kind of debate that I think we are having, both on our panel and more broadly in the community at events like this, is that goal of trying to answer that question. What do we value when it comes to some of these digital technologies and what they mean for our communities? I'll stop there. I look forward to the discussion that's going to take place over the course of the evening, and hand it over to Christina.
Thank you, Michael, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to spend a few minutes with you just talking a bit about Waterfront Toronto's journey into innovation and to the digital realm, so you understand a bit more about how we've gotten to have this conversation that we're going to have today. As many of you are aware, Waterfront Toronto has a mandate to revitalize the lands by Lake Ontario, transforming past industrial sites into thriving neighborhoods that support economic vitality and enhance quality of life. We were created in 2001 by all three levels of the government with this simple mandate. However, embedded in our DNA has always been a commitment to innovation and economic development, which actually has led to a further definition on our mandate specific to our innovation agenda, which looks at how do we create a world-leading exemplar of 21st century city building where the physical, digital, social, environmental, and economic factors align to create an exceptional quality of life. In that, we look at issues like creating one of the world's most connected digital communities, and one of the sort of forefathers of that initiative, Bill Hutchison, is with us tonight in the audience. How do we provide equitable opportunities to this connectivity and to the jobs and so on that will be created as a result? How do we foster innovation and sustainability throughout the work that we're doing? And how do we create mutually respectful and mutually beneficial alliances and partnerships? From our inception, we have followed the Intelligent Community Forum's approach to developing not smart cities, but intelligent communities, which has this more holistic focus on the convergence of connectivity, sustainability, inclusivity, innovation, engagement, and creating the knowledge workforce to be able to have a successful community as we move forward. Interestingly, the ICF was actually formed here in Toronto out of a conference back in 1995 called Smart 95. So Toronto has long been a leader in this space. In 2016, we undertook a further consultation with the market to further refine our resilience and innovation framework for sustainability, which built on Waterfront Toronto's heritage on the sustainability forefront, but added a digital component to it. You'll note, though, in the very center of all the work that we're doing, it's human-centered. The people who are going to live, learn, work, and play in the waterfront are always the central focus point for us. A few snapshots about things that we've done thus far in the space. The privately funded gigabit network that we have in the waterfront with Beanfield Metro Connect is a bit of a cornerstone for everything that we've done for innovation by creating enabling infrastructure, very consistently to how we do flood protection. This is sort of the digital enabling infrastructure component. We also have a digital inclusion strategy that is embedded right within that program, where we actually have made sure that regardless if you are a market housing tenant or you are on a rent geared to income space, you will have access to that network. The network costs actually vary all the way from normal $60 a month to absolutely free. So you basically are paying to your ability to pay. We also have worked with Menkes on the development of the Waterfront Innovation Center, which will soon be home to WPP, Mars Discovery District's expansion, as well as the University of Toronto. So it's been quite great to have the U of T join George Brown College and OCADU down in the waterfront community as well. We've also worked to lead the Toronto bid for the Intelligent Community of the Year in 2013, and in 2014, we were successful in having the city recognized in that capacity. Today, we are at an important moment in this conversation. So a lot of what we've been doing thus far has been fairly traditional development work with a hint of digital overlaid into it. Personally, I've been working in the sort of, if you will, smart city space for almost 20 years. And never before have I seen the community in a position to participate in this conversation as meaningfully as they are today. And in part, that's because of the sort of catalytic work that's happening here, the divisive nature of some of the conversations that are happening, the coverage that we've had in the media, and certainly a much more engaged community down here in the waterfront than we would have typically had in many other jurisdictions. That being said, even though we're having this high degree of discourse, there remains a gap on the civic literacy front when it comes to digital issues, and that's why the work of the Toronto Public Library in particular is being highlighted today. Risks, ethical considerations, including privacy, data ownership, data sharing, are being discussed in a more balanced way than ever before, and we genuinely do have a chance to create an intelligent community that is inclusive and reflects the needs of the wishes of the citizens. This area is evolving quickly. Even as we were preparing the materials for this meeting, there was breaking news on this front, with the federal government yesterday announcing their digital charter. The digital charter recognizes the increasingly important role that digital technology is playing in society and the fact that Canadians must be able to trust that their privacy is protected, that their data will not be misused, and that companies operating in this space communicate in a simple and straightforward manner with their users. Privacy is one of many topics that we're looking at the waterfront, and they're all very complex topics. But one thing that is really important to set in terms of context is what Waterfront Toronto's role is and is not in this space. So we cannot, at Waterfront Toronto, create new or modify the existing policy or regulatory framework. We can require compliance from our partners with the existing environment and encourage them to exceed those requirements through contractual obligations. We can convene conversations, such as this one, about these issues and leverage their proposals as a grounding mechanism to think through specific opportunities and limitations. And we can share information with our government shareholders to complement their consultation activities. With all of these issues being so robust and diverse, Waterfront Toronto doesn't have all of the internal capacity to have those conversations. So part of what we've done is we've added external capacity to complement our team. A key part of that is our Digital Strategy Advisory Panel. You've just heard from our chair, Michael Geist. The other members can just raise their hands so people know who you are. We've got Kevin, Yitta, Dave, Charles. I don't know if I've missed anyone. If I have, I apologize. But they have been essential in helping us think through these sort of thorny issues. We've also worked with Mars on a data trust primer to explore what a digital stewardship body might look like, and Alex Ryan is here tonight from Mars. We've also had the real wonderful opportunity to work with some forward-thinking legal minds. We've got George Takash from McCarthy's, Tim Banks from Innovation, and Chantal Bernier from Denton's, who you'll be able to speak with at the various different corners, who've been helping guide us through that. And internally, we've added capacity. We have Michael Wolf, who's on my team, and Vance Lockton, who just recently joined us as the Manager of Digital Governance. This conversation has been ongoing for approximately a year. It started at some of the early roundtables for the Quayside project. We heard loud and clear that there was public concern about these digital issues that needed a focused attention. So Waterfront Toronto undertook to do the Civic Lab program, which was an invitation series of events with subject matter experts to explore three key issues: digital governance in a broad area, digital trusts or digital stewardship, and realizing the benefits of data. Tonight's public digital consultation is the result of these efforts and as a result of all of the conversations we've had even outside of that through the other consultation efforts that we've been having on Quayside as well as the other Waterfront Toronto projects. Just to reflect for a moment on what we heard at the Civic Labs. Participants told us at the first Civic Lab that we needed to broaden our participation of both the private sector and civic tech. Throughout the next series of events, we added those additional voices, which provided us with insurmountable value. Participants also said that we needed to leverage the experience of others, and as I've noted, we have continued to add expertise to our team. On all 3 civic labs, it was noted that public education is really key to address these issues, so we are continuing to be committed to figuring out a vehicle to best do that for our city. Digital trusts and digital stewardships were really discussed in Civic Lab number 2, and the very first message that we heard loud and clear is a need around clarity of purpose and understanding what the stewardship body would actually need to accomplish above and beyond any existing framework for regulation and enforcement. We also need to understand what value a smart city more broadly has to its residents. Public trust and public accountability are essential. There needs to be a funding and sustainability model built into the beginning of the stewardship body. There was a push for public leadership, an identified role for both private and nonprofit sectors, protection of the public interest without cramping innovation. A digital stewardship body would need to strive to balance the spontaneity and unpredictability of innovation with the protection of the public interest. The importance of regulatory frameworks, legal issues, enforcement, and compliance. Potential ways to manage data, understanding what is and is not acceptable in terms of data collection, data access, and how data would be shared with private actors. The absolute need for people to be able to control their data and to look and learn from what others have done. In Civic Lab 3, which Michael has recapped very nicely, there was this focus on what we value. This conversation went more broadly and more deeply in many ways than we could have ever imagined. There was a focus on understanding what the potential benefits to all citizens that a smart city or digital project could produce, what residents would want from their city more broadly, and how do new technologies enable this. From the perspective of all 3 levels of government, what are the public sector objectives in exploring smart and digital cities, and what would success look like? Balancing collective public value and private value. How could we avoid privileging the few over the many? And beyond monetary value, what is the aggregate social cost of smart and digital cities? Other key issues explored included a continued dialogue on data collection, use, and stewardship, balancing the protection of privacy with encouraging innovation, economic opportunity, and broader public benefit. Cybersecurity and the tension between service and surveillance were also explored. There was also a recognition that Canadian companies need to have an opportunity to participate. Several participants agreed that there should be an important role for these Canadian companies, including ensuring that they are able to compete and succeed in any future opportunity. So after having these civic labs, we had a moment that we could actually reflect on them. And what we've done is drafted a first attempt at our digital principles that we're happy to share with you tonight, and we'll be discussing over in the corner over here. I just want to highlight with you just a couple of key things. We really are trying to ensure that personal privacy, civil liberties, and human dignity are protected, that we're providing shared benefits, including an economic catalyst for open innovation, informing the broader public policy dialogue on digital technology and data, and determining whether technology is even the right answer to the challenge or opportunity. And finally, future-proofing our emerging neighborhoods and ensuring resiliency and adaptability. These draft principles, once we've completed our consultation process, will then go to our Digital Strategy Advisory Panel for their thoughts before they become finalized and part of Waterfront Toronto's ongoing process as we consider new partnerships. It's important to note as well that any projects coming forward in the waterfront would have to fully comply with all applicable legislative and regulatory requirements. I'll just highlight just quickly the 5 key pillar areas of these principles, and then if you're interested in learning more, as I said, we will discuss them over in the corner. Principle 1 is centered on inclusivity, accessibility, and shared benefit. Principle 2 looks at innovation, agility, and flexibility. Principle 3 is focused on transparency, accountability, and responsibility. Principle 4, privacy, data protection, cybersecurity, and resiliency. And Principle 5 is on architecture, ownership, and technological sovereignty. All of these are anchored with a core foundation that any project proposed to Waterfront Toronto must represent ethically responsible innovation that reflects public values and preserves or enhances the public good. Finally, you'll notice that I didn't get particular about the Quayside project in my remarks because this is more broadly about all the work that Waterfront Toronto may be doing in the future. But if you are interested in learning more about the Quayside project and the evaluation process moving forward, we have launched a Quayside website from Waterfront Toronto's perspective, which is at quaysideto.ca, and you'll find articles about process and next steps that you can certainly engage with us and leave your comments as well there. With that being said, I will pass it to Pam.
Hi, everybody. Wow, that light's really bright. I'm really pleased to see such a great turnout tonight. This is my colleague Alex Carruthers, and we are hoping tonight to provide you with some information about Toronto Public Library, our current work in support of digital literacy and digital inclusion. I'm just going to forward my little slide here. There we go. And we look forward to hearing more from you tonight over in the breakout session that's over in that corner. So why TPL and why digital literacy? As we know, the foundations for lifelong success are increasingly dependent on access to online services and networks. And a city really, truly can't be a smart city unless all residents have equitable access and support to learn how to access and how to interpret the services and resources. So if Toronto, as we've heard tonight, already has a number of smart city technologies in place and is also potentially going to have one of the most data-producing neighborhoods in the world, then Toronto really needs to have the supports in place to help Torontonians be the most data literate in the world. And this is really where we see TPL having a strong role. So libraries really are the backbone on which smart people, communities, and cities can be built and sustained. And we use this mantra all the time, but I'm going to repeat it here again. No other public institution than the public library has the mandate and the reach, the physical and technical infrastructure, the talent and community presence to support digital inclusion and literacy for all. If you're not aware, Toronto Public Library has 100 branches. We are in every neighborhood as a hub in this entire city, and we know the communities we serve and what they need. And we really can help customize our supports and services for those communities. This statement, though, is such an important statement because it helps guide our transformation as public library service, and also that transformation is also informed to the broader government, civic, and community transformations that are happening. I'm going to turn it over to Alex because I do want to make sure that you're all aware of the overview of current digital literacy and digital inclusion services that we're providing before we welcome you over to our corner.
You don't have to stand up here, it's weird. Thanks, Pam. Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you an overview of what digital literacy services we offer so you can give us some direction on where we need to go. When you think of the library, you maybe think of internet access and computers, but in the last 5 years, our digital literacy service has grown to include access to basic tech like Wi-Fi hotspot lending, and up to access to the latest and greatest tech in our digital innovation hubs and our pop-up learning labs. The first digital innovation hub opened at TPL in 2014. The hubs provide any TPL card holder with access to a wide range of equipment, including 3D printers, Mac computers, audio and video equipment, as well as software for 3D design, graphic and web design, audio and video editing. In these spaces, Torontonians are provided with the information and the tools and the support they need to participate in, contribute to, and succeed in today's digital environment. A pop-up learning lab is a mobile innovation programming kit for all ages and provides access to new technology that supports skills building and collaborative learning at library branches that do not have digital innovation hubs. The library has 6 pop-up learning labs that travel to a new library branch every month. Through our digital innovation hubs, we've developed important and growing relationships with the open data and civic tech communities. So since 2016, we've hosted the monthly Open Data Book Club, where meetings look at government-owned data sets as if they were a book to understand them better. We've also run civic hackathons that bring together people to try and come up with creative solutions to social issues.
It's important to us to offer a wide range of ways to learn: experiential, collaborative, peer-to-peer, e-learning opportunities, so hackathons, meetups, learning circles, study groups, and regular old classes are some of the ways that we provide digital literacy to our users. We have 20 learning centers across the city. These are computer labs that we use to teach topics from how to use a mouse to how to use Office software up to introduction to Photoshop. In 2018, the Digital Innovation Hubs, the pop-up learning labs, and the learning centers combined ran 3,800 programs across the city with 29,700 participants. In 2017, we launched the Digital Privacy Initiative. We've hosted public talks by local experts and film screenings on digital privacy issues. We're piloting access to the privacy-enhancing Tor browser at the North York Central Library and hosting educational classes run by our own staff at libraries across the city. Since launch, we've hosted 72 programs on the topic of digital privacy for 1,180 participants, including a day-long Digital Privacy Expo last September, which is up on the screen. The expansion of this initiative focuses on providing public education on algorithmic literacy, AI and machine learning concepts. Some examples of what we've got coming up are this Saturday, May 25th, there's an installation about smart cities and data issues in the atrium of the Toronto Reference Library tied to a Jane's Walk that's going to take people out and point out the infrastructure of smart cities that exists already. Next Tuesday, May 28th, we're hosting a panel titled "Don't Get Hit by That Self-Driving Car," featuring speakers from the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, Tech Reset Canada, and Element AI, which will be at the Northern District Library. Throughout the year, you can expect to hear more from us, more public lectures, more classes, more learning circles, more opportunities to learn hands-on with this kind of tech going forward. In 2018, we launched Let's Learn Tech, which offers online courses in the Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and Linux from the Cisco Networking Academy. We've partnered with Toronto Employment and Social Services to run facilitated study groups using these online courses for Torontonians so they can get the skills they need to participate in the 21st century workforce. We're expanding this service in 2019 with new courses by opening up our study groups to the public. And there's more. There's more. We have after-school youth hubs and neighborhood improvement areas that provide access to advanced tech. We offer children's robotics programming at 50 branches, and not captured are the digital life skills for seniors courses that we offer in neighborhood branches around the city, with a planned expansion for seniors programming and digital literacy for later this year. Our hope is that these efforts and opportunities aren't just beneficial for individuals. Instead, we want them to bridge the digital divide and expand Toronto's knowledge, skills, and networks, and engage learners of all ages so that all Torontonians have the opportunity to reach their potential and contribute to the success of their community. Public libraries, we don't think of them as just a place to consume content, and increasingly they're a place to create content, to work collaboratively with others. And we don't think of libraries as about what we have for people, they're about what we do with and for people. So in that spirit, we're coming to you as part of our strategic planning for 2020 to 2024, and we want to know how we can grow our digital literacy services to make sure they're responding to the needs, and I'll say values as well, because that's come up in all the conversations so far tonight, the needs and values of Torontonians. Our big questions are on the screen, and we'll be looking forward to more in-depth conversation with you later in the agenda. Thank you very much, and over to Nicole.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just drive home the point that everybody's an expert in digital. So what I'd like you to do is think about one way that digital technology benefits your life, that you think it benefits your life. And think about one way that it might concern you or raise a question for you. I'm just going to leave it with you. Think one way, there's something you like, don't like. It's kind of binary, but something that's a benefit, something that's a challenge, potentially. Just for a minute. Give it some thought. All right. I'd like you to stand up, find somebody you don't know, compare notes. You got 2 minutes. All right, that's 2 minutes. Take your pair of two, connect with the next pair of two, compare notes, and then I'm going to move some mics around the room so we get a flavor of what you're talking about. So take your pair of two, find another pair of two, introduce yourself. We're trying to make the point there's a lot of experts in this room. So take your pair of two, meet another pair of two. You've got 2 more minutes, and then we're going to move the mic around the room. Are you in the back on this side? Are you? I am. Okay, and the other guy's got it covered on the other side? All right, that was just supposed to be enough to get our juices flowing. In the next 30 seconds or so, maybe wrap up your discussion. I'm going to move a little bit around the room, starting over here with Bill. Then Clyde's going to pick somebody from that side of the room. Just give us a flavor of the kind of topics you covered. This is before we move into the rest of the meeting. What kind of stuff were you thinking about or talking about as you talked to your neighbor?
We seem to have a great deal of interest in finding information that is current and quick, navigation information, reference information, jobs available all the time. That was most of our benefits.
Lovely. Somebody over there, give us a flavor of what you talked about.
Is there something in your group that nothing yet? Is there something?
Takers, Nicole. Sorry, what was the question? We're just...
Give us a flavor of what you talked about.
What we talked about?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the fact that the technology can really help us to connect with people that we wouldn't stay in touch with. So people, friends from other countries and whatever, but also on a day-to-day to actually, for me to keep in touch with my wife. And then we talked about some of our concerns. A couple of us were members of Starwood Preferred Guests, which had a big data breach including credit card information. We talked about Cambridge Analytica and some of the Facebook concerns. And also the addiction of the way the technology is preying on our addictive personalities and grabbing our attention.
Good. I'm going to go to this group here because I knew they were active. Somebody here want to take the mic and give us a flavor of what you talked about? And then Jackie, grab somebody at the back after, just to get a flavor.
Sure. So we were talking about data collection and in particular the idea of owning your data, a pretty popular term, and the question of what kind of digital literacy do you have to even own your data? What does that even mean? And can people even own their data? And is that the solution? And we just, right at the end there, we started to get to this question of if that data gets combined with other data, which gets combined with other data, and you never know it, then what implications does that have for you downstream? And the sort of the real and perceived harms and what that means. So a lot of concern and a lot of sort of fear and uncertainty and doubt there.
Great. Thank you. Go.
Yeah, so Jeff and I, Nabila, we talked about the benefits of being connected to the world, right? And he was just mentioning about how his experience in the past, he would pass sticky notes to people in different departments, but now with technology, he can do it instantly. And we talked about the challenges of technology as well. Although we could be connected to people across the world, we might not be so connected to people who are near us, right? Who are next to us. And we feel that there's this alienation processes going on because of technology, and that's something that we should discuss more about, how to counter those things.
Thank you. Great. And every time somebody's talking, somebody else is nodding their head. So even if you didn't talk about it, there's some common spirit around some of these points. Give us a flavor of what you talked about. We're not going to do this forever, but just to get a signal that there's quite a bit that people have are able to jump in on these topics.
I'll keep it very short because I'm stuck with the ambivalence of the digital. And really, ambivalence is my response to most technologies, I suppose, since the original 5 digits that I have on my hand here, which is the origin of the word digital itself. So it's connected to the body. So, so on the side of concerns, there's a heap. And among the ones I would add to the ones I've already heard, we tend to think of privacy as very individual, but I think we need to think of surveillance as much more social. And 2 words I would throw in the mix would be social sorting, which begins already with consumer surveillance and database marketing. So you can sort people by creaming some people off the top and cutting other people out, So that leads nicely into an age of data-driven, big data, data-driven analytics, and social sorting in the present, which used to classify people, sort them, and that's a door to digital discrimination. So I'm very concerned about the democracy side of the digital world. And for every smart technology, I hope there's a smart citizen.
We do too. I think that's pretty consistent. Okay, we're going to do a couple more, and before we keep going, yeah.
Yeah, we also talked about a couple things which have been said before. In addition, the information are much easier accessible, but it also takes some time to validate them because you have to know the source and compare. And then you think you are fast using the internet or the data, but it takes a lot of time on the other hand, which you don't see what's being consumed.
Agreed. Over here. Same point. Okay, good. Anybody else want to jump in on what they talked about before we kind of keep rolling? We hope, yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Hi, we talked about the impact of the new digital on aging and looking at how, as the society gets older, how this new digital neighborhoods can benefit people with mobility challenges. We talked about the idea of autonomous or driverless vehicles as benefits. We talked about AI in terms of people dictating verbally or however they choose what they want and getting it. We talked about some of the challenges, privacy by design, which somebody else spoke about before. But we talked about privacy by design as an issue. That's important.
Okay, we had a couple other mics. And Alex, there's a gentleman at the back here too. Okay, go ahead.
So we were chatting about a couple of things. First of all, the benefits. Lance and I were talking about the convenience. Him from an international connectivity point of view, trying to set up meetings, marketing products all over the world. I'm just looking at the convenience of everything, knowing from when a bus is coming to all that sort of thing. On the other side, a concern is what I'd call digital inclusion. And so both in the urban areas in particular, bringing along people that can't afford to buy their kids computers, very demeaning if they have to keep running next door to do their homework when you have to do it. But the other issue is the rural areas and the remote areas of Canada, bringing them along too. So we can't create a have and a have-not society.
Great, continue.
One of the things that I think we can't overlook, and that I actually didn't discuss in our group specifically, but is the ability to include people with disabilities, with challenges digitally in a way that you couldn't 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And when we think about, for example, the Accessibility for Ontarians with the Disabilities Act and how we can implement that through a technological framework, I think that's very important to keep in mind.
So we've got, yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a lot, but the lack of trust in so many issues around this is what bothers me personally, and I'm thinking the physical lack of trust, what happens if it breaks down and we're without something for a day or two, or a war comes and they bring the satellites down. I mean, what are we going to do as a society when we've lost it? I don't trust the sharks that are going around all this, the big commercial sharks wanting to take out whatever they can out of this and get it. And some of the institutions, how much knowledge do they really have on all these issues?
Okay, so we got no shortage of things to chew on this evening. That was both on the upside and on the challenge side. I think we already got a good cross-section of points and lots of nodding heads. The challenge in public service, and Waterfront Toronto and the Toronto Public Library are both public agencies dedicated to public service, is to use their best efforts to navigate, to listen to the public, and try and navigate what kind of values we're going to have informing, and principles will be informing our decisions around public service and public sector decisions. And so that's what we're hoping to take for the rest of the evening. So let me explain. It's really a self-curated event where we have brilliant people in the audience coming from the public, but we also have a number of very smart people from the Public Library, Waterfront Toronto, Tech Reset Canada, and the Digital Justice Lab in the room. So what I'm going to orient you to is who's doing what where. So if you're part of the digital neighborhood discussion, before all of you move, just people who are part of the digital neighborhood discussion, can you walk up and, like George, I'm looking right at you, just get up and walk that way so people see what you look like. And Michael Geist is also going to go talk about digital neighborhoods. Natasha from the Board of Trade is also here. Great. She's going to be at digital neighborhoods. So what's going to happen in that corner of the room is a conversation about all of the different things you need to think about. And of course, there's overlap in all four corners. Okay, so, but here. What we need to think about when we think about a digital neighborhood. You've got some very smart folks. You can ask questions, but you also have a very smart group here. You can share your thoughts. The idea is to have a good conversation about digital neighborhoods. Over here, we've got guests from, Nazma's there from the Digital Justice Lab. Bianca is here from Tech Reset Canada. If you make your way over to this corner, they are going to talk about the work that their organizations do around digital justice and digital equity, and there will be plenty of conversation and interaction. Ask them questions, share your points of view. In every station, we will have a facilitator from our team taking notes so that we will be able to share the feedback tonight with you, and also Waterfront Toronto and the library will be able to use it for their work. So that one is digital neighborhoods, that's digital justice and equity. In this corner, you've got the team from the Toronto Public Library. You met Pam and Alex already. There's also Kim and Abe. They are working very hard to figure out what they can do to best support the city in terms of growing digital literacy. They'd like to talk to you about that over there. And then in the final corner over here, Christina Werner from Waterfront Toronto, great, plus Chantel Bernier, plus Vance, plus maybe some others from the Digital Strategy Advisory Panel, fantastic, are going to be talking over their draft digital principles. Dave makes his way over, others, about the draft digital principles she presented, and if you have thoughts or comments or questions about those. This is really a curate it yourself kind of event. If you really are into one of these topic areas and you want to stay there for the next hour, go ahead. But at 8:30, we're going to regroup so we can reflect on how the conversations go. If you look up and you see 50 people at the library and nobody at the next one, maybe organize yourself to make best use of the empty corner rather than everybody kind of overflowing in one. Okay, so it's up to you. We will regroup here exactly at 8:30. Okay, make your way over. We're going to have a facilitator from each of the four corners kind of report back on what we heard. And if Bianca and Nazma can come over to make sure that I don't miss anything. Ian and Alex, you guys just about ready to go? George, you want to come over this way and be a part of this discussion? Also, Christina, Vance, and folks, do you guys want to come over this way? And Toronto Public Library, you guys want to make your way over this way? Okay, maybe I'll start it off. We were back in the corner here with the Digital Justice Lab and Tech Reset Canada having a conversation about equity and digital justice. And I'm going to just flag a little bit of how that conversation unfolded because I don't think all of you were able to visit us at one through the night. And then maybe I will eyeball Nazma and Bianca as I do that. Where are they? Oh, there. Good. Okay, so we had a bit of a setup. We were talking about, well, first of all, everybody introduced themselves, and most people said they were there to listen and learn and interested in, obviously, talking about equity and what we can do to not leave people behind in a tech environment. And the speed with which things are evolving came up quite a bit. And the fact that there is no meaningful way to do really effective engagement if people don't even have their heads around the basic concepts and the basic terms. We talked a little bit about Toronto and the fact that there are places in Toronto where you can't have access to broadband, and the percentage of a salary that it might cost somebody just to be able to access broadband. But that it's not just broadband. If you're talking and you're not me, make your way over here and maybe listen with the rest of the group. You know, that's the gentlest way I can put it. Okay, so just continuing, beyond broadband, there was also big concerns about data capture. So, and the fact that it's being kind of normalized. So Google Home, Alexa, Nest, recording people that walk by in front of your house, sending you a notification of their skin color, and then you being able to take an action in response. These kinds of things were raised, an Apple Watch that catches your every movement. And if some of this data capture is totally normalized, then maybe we aren't even conditioned to think about consequences. So that was another big point that came up. The point was made that we're not worried about the ceiling falling down on our heads. Well, why is that? Well, we have engineering standards and building codes, and it may be the case. In fact, in some cases, it would be the case, according to folks in the group, that when it comes to internet as an analogy, there are places where the ceiling is falling down on our heads. And so what we need to do is create a system like engineering standards and building codes or consumer protection policies for health and restaurants and food systems, is how do we create a set of a place where the internet is safe, where we can go there and not worry about the ceiling falling down, whether that's some kind of global nonprofit that works together to create standards, or something that follows a line to what consumers groups did with cars when cars were first invented. And so that was, in broad strokes, what we covered off there. Bianca's nodding. Okay, good. If there's anybody that wants to badly add to it, but otherwise I'd rather just get a flag for kind of how the conversation went here with digital neighborhoods. It sounded quite lively.
It was. Yes, thanks, Nicole. So, yeah, we were at the Digital Neighborhoods station. I will also eyeball the people that were at my station. That's George and Michael and Natasha and Alex too, who is with me, and Michael from Waterfront Toronto, if I miss anything. We began our conversation talking about really trying to even just define when a neighborhood becomes digital. Like, is there some threshold after which your neighborhood is digital? Because many of these technologies already exist. I don't think we really landed on a threshold or an answer, but one idea was that something that distinguishes these places is that they are smart by design, so they are designed with digital technologies in mind and has been built smart, quote unquote, smart from the ground up. So we had, that was the beginning of our conversation. We also talked a lot about data trusts and regulation, questions over who manages data, how does it flow, where is it stored, connected to conversations about how do you know if something is actually tracked about you. One participant gave an example of they just learned that when they walk into a shopping mall, their phone is tracking and sending information about them to shopping mall owners, and they had no idea that that was the case or how they would even find out that that was the case. Someone suggested you might have an app on your phone that you could use in a digital neighborhood that tells you what's being collected about you, but how do you even need to know that you need that app? So we talked a lot about that. Another conversation connected to that was about de-identification. So some technologies that some people have been seen proposed in relation to Quayside specifically is LiDAR. So it's a low resolution recording system, but that might be high resolution enough to potentially identify people. So we talked a lot about how do you ensure that de-identification happens if there are tools in digital neighborhoods that can identify people potentially. A couple other things we talked about how there's an analogy, I'm not sure I totally grasped it, but I'll do my best, of when you take a drug, it has some side effects. So there might be some benefit in understanding what those side effects are, but also sometimes you got to take a drug in order to get better. So wasn't really pro or against taking drugs, but just another way to think about it. Medicinal drugs, just to be clear. And then we also talked about how it's really important to feel comfortable. So walking into decisions with your eyes open about what the different options are associated with different choices. A couple last points, and then maybe I'll jump over to the principles to Jeff. People have said that what's happening in Toronto is being watched around the world, so it's really important for us to make a good decision that gets it right. We also talked about the difference between a test bed and a neighborhood, and that it's really important that whatever's that gets built is a neighborhood, not just if something gets built, that it's a neighborhood, not a test bed. Final point was really strong on enforcement, that we're talking about our existing regulations and how there are some holes and gaps, and one of the key things in our regulatory framework that would need to be plugged in any digital neighborhood would be gaps around enforcement, around privacy protections and things like that. So that's a bit of a flavor. Jeff?
Well, thanks. Many of the issues and concerns that were raised by the other groups were also talked about in digital principles. So I think that the concerns are pretty universal. It doesn't matter how we chop them up. I want to raise just some of the concerns that or issues that people brought to the group. There wasn't so much a discussion of each of the principles and what people liked or disliked, but first of all, I think people want to know how these principles would be used. And I think that it became clear that one of the roles of the principles was to tell potential partners, developers, people who would work with Waterfront Toronto, what the community would be comfortable with, and and then these principles would inform the evaluation of proposals and commercial agreements. People wanted to know, for instance, how these principles fit into the federal digital charter that just came out. And I think that what they were told was that there was good complementarity there, and that Waterfront Toronto would seek to ensure even greater complementarity with that charter. People also just wanted to know, how do you ensure that only the data that's absolutely needed is being collected? And education there was seen to be the key. You have a responsibility yourself to just sort of kind of understand what's being collected and what it's being used for. And that led us to the last sort of thing that I'll raise here, or second last, is what do these principles do to address privacy, to address data collection? And I think the point was made time and again that the legislation is the floor, and these things are on top of that legislation, and that still federal and provincial regulators would have a jurisdiction over the data that's collected on the waterfront. So there's lots of levels here, and the principles are not just the only thing. And then people want to know what happens when the system fails, because it will fail. Somebody who'd worked in IT their whole lives was in our group and said, it's going to fail. And so how was this worked into the principles? And so this question of redundancy needs to be addressed.
Thanks very much. And Jackie, last but not least, was working with the library folks. Give us a sense of how your conversation went.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so I was over there with the folks at the library. Tried to frame the discussion around 3 questions, but ended up talking about 5 broad buckets. The good stuff. The programming at the library, there's a lot of programming, and a few participants shared that they weren't aware of all these things. And hearing that is very nice to hear. Some highlights of that conversation was more self-learning programs like lynda.com, and other programs focused on computer programming and Photoshop. Their ebooks catalog and audiobooks catalog got some discussion as well. some of the upcoming issues and challenges in the next 5 years is understanding terms and conditions of apps and programs and tools and devices, understand user rights, understanding the consequences of using smart devices and living in smart cities, and understand how data can be used as a commodity and putting some context around data. Other suggested new kind of programs are how to identify truthful sources on the internet. So like that's kind of sifting through this buzzword of fake news, and live translation services on some of the archival pieces. Audiences we talked about include seniors, children, newcomers, low-income communities, and incarcerated people. Last piece was the physical piece of libraries. There's some interest in expanding outside of the libraries. The library already has a few programs that go into community organizations, and they have pop-ups in other branches. But there was some interest in increasing these opportunities to co-locate in spaces. That's it for my list.
Lovely. So I think we had a lot of discussions and most people really stuck it out. If you didn't have a chance to get what you wanted to say out, or you know others that want to weigh in on it, the back of your agenda has a really nice description of how to provide feedback after the meeting. And we were using Wednesday, June the 5th as the deadline for that feedback. But of course, there's always a lot of, there are always a number of different mechanisms to provide feedback. But if you want to provide something specifically on what was shared tonight, just look on the back of your agenda. It actually goes straight to Ian, who you heard from, and just get it to us by June 5th. We'll do a summary of what we've heard tonight, and we'll make sure that's shared as well. I think that's it for tonight. I wanted to give a big thanks to all the presenters and all the participants for a super high quality discussion. I don't know if Christina or Pam want to say anything from the library other than a big thanks for coming.
I just, on behalf of Waterfront Toronto, wanted to thank everyone who came tonight and shared your perspectives. We really appreciate it. We hope that you will take a few moments and share some additional information with us. And I also wanted to take some time and thank the internal Waterfront Toronto team that helped put together the consultation, as well as Nicole's team. Thank you very much for making tonight possible. Thank you to the people who also made this happen from the library, Digital Justice Lab, Tech Reset Canada. And we look forward to continuing this conversation at our next event.
Just one final quick plug. Next week is Digital Literacy Week in Toronto. So if you go to tpl.ca, you'll see all the range of great free programs happening across the city at Toronto Public Library branches. Something for all ages, and everyone across the city, go have a peek. Good night.